So delighted to see you all here, and the good news is we're here together and we'll make our way together. The bad news is our sound system down here went kaput. So I will project as much as I need, and what I would say is if you have some hearing impairment and can't hear me, there's about 3 sweet spots in this room. One is about where Buzz is, or maybe a few feet a little further back. Another one is back over where Robert is, and another one is over where Lynn is. So if you need to move around, but can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right.
You did a good job of that.
We'll figure it out. I've had a cold, and so we'll figure it out here. The Lord be with you. And also with you. Let us pray. Gracious God, you proclaim your truth in every age by many voices. Direct in our time, we pray, those who speak where many listen and write what many read, that they may do their part in making the heart of this people wise, its mind sound, and its will righteous, to the honor of Jesus Christ, our Savior. Amen. Amen. Anyone recognize that prayer?
I read it in your service today.
It's in our prayer book, one of those ones that don't get used very often, but it's for those who influence public opinion, asking for those people to be raised up, whose voices will be heard, and our sound mind as a people will prevail. Seems fitting for our night, doesn't it?
Yes.
Well, as I said, I'm delighted that you are all here, and I want to start before we get into the T.S. Eliot stuff, which I'm just so thrilled about and excited about. Since someone asked me, a year ago or so, would you consider doing something on T.S. Eliot? And I've had a jazz just thinking about it. But I want to highlight the Wisdom School, a new offering here at St. Mark's, and in particular, an evening with Mirabai Starr, a spiritualist of international acclaim, and those who participated in the Richard Rohr event back in July got to know her as a part of that. And we have the great privilege of having her here on Thursday, November 3rd in this space. Those are flyers, and I would ask if you would take those flyers. We can do more if we need, but if you'll take a flyer and put it up at your place of work or at your gym or at your coffee shop, wherever you think that there might be some interest. And feel free to take the brochures about the Wisdom School on with you. There are lots of opportunities. We've talked some in recent weeks about the spiritual journey is this working in, down, and through. It's not about looking at those people out there, but it's about the inward work so that we come out and engage the world in a different way. I think we are in desperate need. We are hungry for an antidote to the busyness of life in our time and the need for the control and the fear-driven modicum that seems to prevail at every turn. This Wisdom School is only a process. It's one process. It is not the next thing which needs to become the idol. Let's resist that. But it's about kenosis, or emptying, or non-attachment, or detachment, or letting go, centering, all of those language, all those terms that find their way through all of the world religions. And so we have some upcoming events in addition to this 2-week series in early November. As I said, Mirabai Starr. We also have a 3-week series that Jennifer Daugherty and I will teach on All Desires Known, a theology of sexuality. And we'll have a wisdom practice day, an opportunity to be together and to really kind of practice through a Saturday on the 19th of November. There are great offerings that are ongoing. Cathedral yoga every Sunday evening, centering prayer Monday nights and Thursdays at noon in McCaw Chapel, and the Labyrinth Walk, of course, on New Year's Eve. Who here has done the Labyrinth Walk on New Year's Eve? Let me see you. Yeah, so about half or so. Mark your calendar now. If you're in town, you need to come be a part of it. So why in the world is a priest facilitating this class instead of a T.S. Eliot professor, doctoral professor, and so forth? Well, I think there's several reasons. First, I was asked by someone in the parish, and it is a part of my journey, my spiritual journey, poetry in general, T.S. Eliot specifically, writing poetry, I think is a function. I had a homiletics professor, a preaching professor, who said, if you're a preacher and you're not writing and reading poetry regularly, you are selling the people short. And so it's a part of what I do. Hopefully it bears out in some of the preaching that you hear. But poetry comes from that word poesis, like hematopoiesis, to make blood. It's the making, it's the creating out of the marrow of meaning. And it's the realm, poetry is the realm of what some people will say, the intellectual aesthete. That it's not just intellectual exercise, but it's also the one who's willing to seek and find beauty in our world. And the poetry is the way that we can tease that out in ways. It's never just the mind, but it strikes at the heart and the soul. It's not prosaic, in other words. Poetry is the language of soul wounds. That's actually from a poem I wrote several years ago, the onomatopoeia of vulnerability. Remember that word, onomatopoeia? Moo and rough and the vulnerability and the stirring deep in the marrow of meaning. And Eliot's poetry, like few others, invite us into this kind of work. It invites us into this vulnerability because he is quintessentially vulnerable with those who are willing to read his poetry and read his life that stands behind it. We'll say more about that in a moment. It resonates deeply with the human spirit across time. I think there's also this theological exercise that we are reflecting on the nature of God, but also reflecting on God's nature in us. And that necessarily involves paradox and mystery and myth and poetry. It's all bound up in there. We'll tease some of that out tonight. And so, as I said, poetry and homiletics have a dialectical engagement, as do, I think, many elements of our lives. The basic premise is that we spend a good deal of our time trying to change the world when, in fact, the real work of life is to change ourselves. It's not trying to change the other or change the out there or to say that we've got a better way to do it. That's not unimportant, but that's not the motivation, you see. The motivation is by changing oneself that we come to recognize the world in a different way and are willing to engage it in a different way, which in fact transforms us and transforms the world. Eliot got that in spades. He got it. Focusing on changing others necessarily involves attachments, idolatries that stifle life for us and others. We know that with our connections with our spouses and our kids and our families and our parents and our pets and our church and elements of the sacred cows at church and the various other elements of life. The paradox is in the letting go. Then the spiritual journey toward wholeness really begins. And I think that Eliot is inviting us into this in a way that he connects in on these sensations that lie deep in our bodies. I'm talking sensations, the five senses, but much more than that too. Sensations that we know to be true, that resonate deep in our bones, deep in our spirits, if we're willing to be aware of them, as he was and invites us to. We create our world by what we notice. You ever thought about that? If you notice the person hurting on the side of the street, it changes the way you see the world in that moment. I was telling someone the other day, when someone lets this community down, my first instinct, if they don't show up when they're assigned to do something, my first instinct is to flash and say, well, how derelict, how irresponsible, how whatever. When in fact, almost always, behind that is they just learned that their best friend from high school died, or their car broke down. So the way we see our world changes us. The danger is in noticing only what accords with what we already think. If we always see the world according to the way we have always seen it, we're never open for that change of oneself. And that change is the medium of this spiritual work. Eliot said it's breaking the seal of this spiritual journey. And he said all the wisdom traditions across the world religions do this. And his poetry and others do as well. There's recurring themes in his poetry of burning, fire, refining, fire. Here's one from East Coker and the Four Quartets. Home is where one starts from. As we grow older, the world becomes stranger, the pattern more complicated of dead and living, not the intense moment isolated, with no before and after, but a lifetime burning in every moment. What if we lived like that? It wouldn't be pain-free, right? In Wasteland, he has a section in Wasteland, we'll look at it next week, that he entitles The Fire Sermon, which of course is a reference to his Buddhist experience in grad school in Harvard. And the Fire Sermon, of course, is what the Buddha delivered to his disciples shortly after his enlightenment. And it's all about how we have to let go, not cling, detach or non-attach. As I said, it's more than semantics. You're using this language of breaking the seal. I.A. Field said, a good reader has a mind paying attention to itself. There has to be this, not only engagement with the text, but this engagement with ourselves while we're engaging the text. It's much harder. You know, if you're reading the newspaper, there's this opportunity to just read about what happens and not really engage with what am I doing with this? How am I responding to this? Read and listen with that observer self intact as a constant companion. And through such mindfulness and self-reflection, then, change becomes possible. And change is the fulcrum between the letting go of what has been and the embracing of what may yet be. So, brief biography of Thomas Stearns Eliot. And I mean brief, like 3 minutes here. But all of this stuff is available. The internet has revolutionized the way we do things. You have to also be discerning with what's on the internet, of course. But born in St. Louis in 1888, went to Harvard, discovered Buddhism there while pursuing his PhD in philosophy. Moved to London just as the war was beginning in 1914. It shaped much of his poetry, the war did, and the effects of the war. He married Vivian Haywood in 1915. She's had all sorts of medical conditions and mental health issues that just really destroyed her life, and he separated but never divorced her until she died. She died in 1947, I think, and she was institutionalized for much of that time. So they were separated, they weren't together, but it impacts. We'll look, I think, next week at some of his work that comes out of that. Wasteland is one poem that is deeply impacted by those early years of their marriage, which just was tanking in all sorts of ways, and he was conflicted with this sense of loss, even despair, and yet this sense of diligence and commitment to Vivian. He was raised in a Unitarian household, didn't really work much for him. As I said, he discovered Buddhism. He did struggle with despair. Kierkegaard says that the true quality of despair is the unawareness of despair. But that wasn't Eliot's challenge. Eliot, in his poetry, Hollow Men and others, is very clearly struggling with his own despair. He just didn't know how to get out of it. He didn't know how to get out of it. And yet, at one point he says, "I'm a stuffed man, head filled with straw," just empty. And yet, the poem in which he writes that, he ends with this doxology. He's not yet kind of this full-fledged, faithful, confessing Christian, Anglican, but he is on this spiritual journey in which all of this emptying, all of this vulnerability with himself and out into his poetry is opening him up into something. And he's able to say that by God's grace, I don't know what, that the doxology is there, the end of the Lord's Prayer. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory, O Lord, now and forever. In 1926, he took a trip to Rome. He knelt in prayer at the foot of the Pietà and had this conversion experience in which he renounced what he said was the void of his life and embraced religious faith really for the first time in a systematic way. Became Anglo-Catholic, became an Anglican, but saw the value of the sacraments in particular. You can read some of his poetry. We won't deal with them here, but Ash Wednesday in 1930 deals with his own journey into this religious system while also struggling with this absence of it in his world post-World War I, when everything prior to that was all about this advancement of humanity and this progressive sense that given enough time and enough effort and enough resource, humanity can figure out how to usher in the kingdom of God, to use one language that some wrote. And then what do? We go and we kill millions of our brothers and sisters. And the work of describing, we'll look at it here in a bit, the work of describing the return of the verdant fields that were just mud, muck, and blood in World War I, all has this dramatic impact on him. In 1943, he publishes the great tome Four Quartets. It's laden with all sorts of spiritual language. It confronts paradoxes of permanence and change. He does all of this fascinating stuff to say, there is no time without timelessness. Does that make your head swim a little? Yeah. There is no time without timelessness. There's no order without chaos. There's no movement without stillness. But don't we know that somehow deep down, inherently, innately to be true? So the rest of the story. Vivian died in 47. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 48. He remarried Valerie Fletcher several years later. They had just less than a decade together, but it was by all accounts a happy marriage. He was a man of worldwide recognized talent and a man of letters and a noted poet, and lived in England out in the areas in which he describes in Four Quartets. And he died in 1965. He's buried in East Coker, and his epitaph is from the quartets that you'll recognize. In the end is my beginning. In the end is my beginning. Some have said that there is an endless spirals of paradox in Eliot's poetry. What do you think that means? How would you describe that? Endless spirals. Why do you think he does it? We'll have time to unpack that, but let me say, paradox in its purest form cajoles us with the constant demand to consider the world, our world, differently. It's the thing that says, if you're looking at the Wheaties box on the front, you got to turn around and look it out on the back, and you'll see something different. If you're looking at west, you got to turn around and look east or north or south to see something different. He uses humor, and he uses his own sense of frustration as constant companions on his spiritual journey. How often do those reveal the truth to us, right? Humor, frustration, But he also cautions, don't lose sight of awe and wonder in it all. He said, I struggled with this a lot. But don't lose sight of awe and wonder in it all. So, from East Coker, you say I am repeating something I have said before. I shall say it again. Shall I say it again? In order to arrive there, to arrive where you are, to get from where you are not, you must go by a way wherein there is no ecstasy. In order to arrive at what you do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by the way of dispossession. In order to arrive at what you are not, you must go through the way in which you are not. And what you do not know is the only thing you know, and what you own is what you do not own, and where you are is where you are not. You want to run? All right. So our structure for this class, which is only 2 weeks. I got called away for a commission meeting with the Episcopal Church last week. It was supposed to be 3, so we're doing this. But we'll break in tonight by listening to T.S. Eliot himself read Journey of the Magi in the 1940s as a part of the British effort to console people by radio. They gathered the renowned poets and authors, storytellers on the radio. And so we've got some of those recordings. I'm hoping that my technology will work here in a minute. We'll look at the rest of our excerpts come from Wastelander for Quartets. Just choose and pick some. Go read the full anthology on your own. We'll do this tripartite approach to the selected excerpts that we have. It's an adapted Lectio Divina in which we'll read the passage 3 different times, a different voice each time. And we'll ask the question on the first reading, what word or phrase strikes you? What grabs you in the reading? The second reading is, where do you locate yourself in the poem that we've read? And thirdly, what is the poem calling you? How is the poem calling you to respond in your life? All right? So, will someone pass out copies of Journey of the Magi here? I think I've got plenty of copies for everybody. So, and if you have a pen or a pencil, great. If not, just make your mental note. But what word or phrase struck you in the poem? We're going to condense this exercise down on this as we move on, but just to give you a sense of what that first question is. What word or phrase strikes you, and why? Poetry was intended to be heard and spoken, not just read.
That's why Shakespeare is always so much better when you see it.
Yeah.
Impossible.
Well, it's just for all poetry. It's designed to be to be heard and read. So read it out loud to yourself. Perhaps get a partner and go have coffee and read something together. All right. Let's move on. That's just a kind of a foretaste. Now let's dive into part of 4 quartets. And this is where I'm going to ask, we'll alternate. So we'll actually do an exercise of reflection, this 3-part reflection, where we're going to read it 3 times. You'll be given a question for each time. Then we're going to ask you to turn to your next door neighbor and chat about whatever it is that you want to share about those reflections. And then we'll have just very briefly kind of a report back in. All right, so we'll take 10 minutes to do all this. Would someone like to read this 6 lines? Jennifer, would you maybe stand up and project out so everyone can hear? And the first question is, what word or phrase strikes you as Jennifer reads?
I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith, but the faith and the love and hope are all in the wait. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing.
Thank you. What word or phrase strikes you? And there are copies of this on your table. I apologize for not pulling it out. Now could I ask a male to stand and read it again? Alan?
I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. For love would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love, for love would be love of the wrong thing. Yet there is faith, but the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing.
Where do you locate yourself in this poem?
Like reading a Zen koan.
And then a female to read it once more. Glenn?
I said to my soul, be still, and wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Wait without love. For love would be the love of the wrong thing. There is yet faith. But the faith and the love and the hope are all in the waiting. Wait without thought, for you are not ready for thought. So the darkness shall be the light, and the stillness the dancing.
And where's the poem calling you to respond in your life? If it is. Those questions are not intended to be answered in full at this moment in time. But what I would ask is, would you turn to someone at your table nearby, or move over and switch it up a little. 1 minute each, just whatever you want to share about this and those questions, however you want to share. 1 minute, and I'll probably have some plenary sharing here about whatever you want to share. Obviously, 2 or 3 minutes worth of sharing with someone else isn't gonna open up into the kind of journey that we're talking about. It just can't do that. What I would invite, I had someone yesterday say, you know, the problem with this process, Steve, with this design of this class, of this kind of class like I did last year too, is that it doesn't really develop deep relationships. But that's not the design here, right? If you're wanting to extend the relationship, set your coffee appointment. Go have lunch. Meet after church or in between services. And continue the conversation. All right? You can even talk in bed at night if you still young. Husband and wife over here, I'll just clarify. Anyone want to share anything about that?
Yeah, I started reading in Quartets when I was in college. So what it says to me is it's in the palimpsest form, because things have been erased from my previous understandings and written over, but I can still see them.
It's a beautiful image, Pat. Thank you. Yeah, Lynn?
Just as a little history, this poem was read here by me on 9/11. The original 9/11 was one of the 5 readings that we did.
Really?
Yeah. And it was my first reading. I remember getting up in the piano and thinking, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to read tonight. And the poem took over.
Yeah.
And just carried me through it. Just the wonderful sense that we just had this, we didn't know what was going to happen, we didn't know, but we couldn't sit there and be still with each other in community. It was so powerful. And for me personally, I pretty much knew I could read anytime, anywhere.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Wow.
Good. Yes, Mary.
I guess the words for me, the first answer to your question was wait without hope. And the reason for that was that seems to me to be what my life is. And yet always we hear the voices, be hopeful and be this and be something else and something else. But in fact, when we're actually doing the being, it feels very empty and dumb and blind. And he, all of those lines express that. So it is.
Yeah.
And it's very nice to have affirmed.
It's very nice to
Very nice to be affirmed.
affirmed. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you paraphrase?
What was that, Betsy?
Can you paraphrase what she said a little bit?
That would you
Yeah.
wait without hope? But she said it so much better than I can paraphrase it. So Marilyn, would you stand up and project out?
I thought I was shouting. The wait without hope was what mattered to me, because that feels to me very much the way my life is. Whereas we're always encouraged to wait full of hope, full of this and full of something else. But while you're actually doing the waiting, or whatever it is, it feels dumb and blind. You don't know what's going on. So for me, that's the way it is. And he's affirmed that. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, again, we're just scratching the surface here, but the exercise is intended to be one that hopefully you'll continue at home. This one we won't read 3 times, we'll read just once, and we won't reflect in tandem, but would someone like to read this excerpt from East Coker as well? Randy, yeah, do I have it? Yeah, we must still, it's at the bottom of your page there. If you'll stand up and project out, that would be great.
We must be still and still moving into another intensity for a further union, a deeper communion. Through the dark cold and the empty desolation, the wave cry, the wind cry, the vast waters of the petrel and the porpoise. And my end is my beginning.
So what word or phrase strikes you there?
We must be still and still moving.
You know, there's paradox in all the major religions of the world. Paradox is just a part of the mystery that religions afford us. I believe that mystery and paradox are necessary for a life of meaning. We're hardwired to struggle with mystery, to wrest with mystery, to be fascinated by and drawn into mystery. All of those paradoxes that to save your life, you must lose it. Someone said that somewhere. Letting go is the only path to safety. To engage the new world, you must dissolve from the old one. Margaret Wheatley says the journey is the accumulation of stillness. Isn't that a beautiful turn of phrase? The accumulation of stillness. That's the journey. It's the accumulation of patience. The accumulation of emptiness. But the union that we seek is not of our own making. It's not this creation in our own minds. It's not our own creation. And how often do we how often does the self hinder the union with that which we're drawn to by denying its presence or its possibility, its reality? and convinces us instead that we've been abandoned. However that manifests in your life. But it's there. It's always there. And Eliot kept turning around and seeing that and claiming that nature, if nothing else, keeps us company along the way, keeps communion with us if we're willing to keep communion with it. All right? So back to our Lectio model. What's this journey really about? Anyone like to read this excerpt? There is only the fight. Let me find out where it is. Yeah, it's at the top of your second page. Someone like to read that, Robert? Thanks.
There is only the fight to recover what has been lost, and found and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem fortuitous, but perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business.
What word or phrase strikes you? Spend just a half a minute about that, and then we'll hear it again. And as
It's like Sisyphus.
yeah,
It's like the journey's the thing.
the journey's the thing. So as hopefully a female will read it now, where do you locate yourself? Someone be willing to stand and read? Yeah, thanks, Deborah.
There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found, and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem unpropitious. But perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business.
Where do you locate yourself in the poem?
That's more that stuff about letting go.
And then as you hear it a third time, where may the poem be calling you to respond? There is only the fight to recover what has been lost and found and lost again and again, and now under conditions that seem unpropitious, but perhaps neither gain nor loss. For us, there is only the trying. The rest is not our business. So let's take, we'll go a little bit longer now in your tandem pair to chat. Again, for about 2 minutes each. One person talking, the other one listening actively, and then I'll call swap here in a few minutes, in a couple minutes. Yeah.
I find myself very attached to outcomes. I'm kind of a crusader. I find myself kind of attached to outcomes. I'm kind of a crusader by nature, and I get very passionate about things, and I try really hard to achieve certain outcomes, and I find this really frustrating.
Yeah. You're not the only one.
So,
Yeah, Betsy.
I was talking about the same thing with Liz here, and the challenge for me is that the rest is not our business. The thing I need more in my life right now than anything else is to let go of the results-oriented life that I've been leading for all these many years, and that the rest is not my business. And it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, I find this whole stuff a total downer, because it's so antithetical to my energy going forward all the time. And yet I know this is what I need to be doing right now.
And that's what
We all
said
need to
here,
do
the
it.
three of us,
Yeah,
you know.
Robin?
The thing, I always thought if I could find the right words and say the right words to my son, my daughter,
Yes.
if I could say the right words, then everything would be okay and everything could be fixed. And I've learned that you have to let go, and that last line, the rest is not our business.
Oh, God.
Oh my. But I have to tell you, I know some things went right. My granddaughter, who I raised since she was 2 months old, recently got a tattoo. And her tattoo is on her left hand, and it says, "Let go." My friend said I should get a tattoo on my right hand that should say, "Hang on."
Jeff?
We talked a little about this, the idea too of sort of life just being something that we have to accept and live into, if you will. But what strikes me about that is there's this gnawing in me that feels like that's a place of privilege. That it's very easy for me as a straight white male, whatever, person of a certain class, but for us, that's an easier thing maybe to do. Whereas for people who are not in that place, that's a harder thing to ask or expect. And so there's the part of me that resists the message here that I think is saying to me is that piece that says, yeah, that's easy for you. But if you weren't in your place, would you feel the same?
Yeah, I kind of agree with that.
So that was the piece that
struggle.
felt comfortable and yet at the same time like yanked me back.
Yeah, Pat?
When I was in Trinity years ago as a deacon, I worked with African American boys. They knew they were never going to make it. They were never going to get it right. They were never going to get it safe. And they made up a prayer that is just about like this. We do our best, God do the best.
Deborah?
I had to laugh this week. This poem reminds me of how much I used to be the queen of 5-year plans. I mean, I'm just the queen. And I think, at least 4 of them were massive fails about year 2. And so finally I got the message that maybe I wasn't so good at that and decided to just focus on walking in the Spirit. And I had a conversation on Monday, and afterwards I said, oh my gosh, how am I going to sustain this for 15 years? Because it's a 15-year plan. And I thought, oh my gosh, Lord, I was thinking too small. That's why you were trying to pay attention. So I just think the delight that the rest is not our business.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a freedom if we can get into it.
If you can get into it.
By my count, Jesus didn't do more than 3 years out. It didn't end well for him. All right, well, in our few minutes that we have left, let me read this and make a few comments. And again, listen for what strikes you, how it's speaking to you in your life, and how it's inviting you to respond in your life. From Little Gideon. And what you thought you came for is only a shell, a husk of meaning, from which the purpose breaks only when it is fulfilled, if at all. Either you had no purpose, or the purpose is beyond the end you figured, and is altered in fulfillment. So one question that we could ask is, do we create our purpose, or do we discover it? Do we create our purpose, or do we discover it? A good Anglican might say both. Viktor Frankl coined this famous phrase, meaning precedes being. You've heard that, I'm sure. Meaning precedes being, suggesting that we must discover and claim our gifts and use them for the purpose to be truly alive. Eliot is cautionary in all of this, though. Again, Margaret Wheatley reflects on it this way. If we rush too quickly into what we think our purpose is, we stifle our true selves. We even can kill it. We rush into action rather than keeping space for the stillness. The spirit slips away and we wilt. We convince ourselves that we know best. And when we do, we play God. So a personal story, some of you have heard this in one form or another, but y'all know that I've been here for 4 years, but the 4 years prior to that, I was working in hospice. I was a priest on Sundays at a large church, but I was really kind of pushed into that action. I didn't stop and still. It was good work. It was meaningful work. It was purposeful work. I claimed it as my vocation, but it was not my vocation. This is. I was convinced that I was called to redirect a company that I served as the CEO and the medical officer. I was called to redefine U.S. healthcare and society's approach to end-of-life decisions, and spoke nationally about all that. I was called to change the world, as arrogant as that seems on reflection. It was ego-driven, which was fear-based, needing to control. It was grandiose. When, in fact, my purpose is to claim life's joy for me and invite others to share that as well. That's why I'm here and not at hospice. That's why we're here tonight, is to discover what our true joy is and invite others to share in that with us.